Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with Dr. Jessie Mahoney.
And Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are physicians and leaders who are also trained in coaching, yoga, mindfulness, and integrative medicine.
We are also mothers, spouses, sisters, daughters, aunts, and friends.
In this podcast, we share candid, heart-centered, loving, science-based, thoughtful, and often fun conversations about the challenges life throws at us.
With our collective experience of over 30 years in physician and personal wellness, we reflect and offer pearls of wisdom for navigating life's challenges with more ease.
From parenting, marriages, money scarcity, cancer survivorship, uncertainty, challenges in practicing medicine, we cover it all.
We invite you to refresh your perspective and empower yourself with mindset, mindfulness, and other well-being tools that actually work. A quick reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical.
Welcome to today's episode, The Art of Negotiating. Do you think you aren't good at negotiating? Do you worry about offending people or disappointing people? Do you want to learn some mindset strategies for effective negotiating? The intention of this episode is to share with you the basics of effective negotiating, give you some mindfulness and coaching tools to help you negotiate better, and understand why doctors and women often struggle with negotiating, what gets in our way. And the biggest takeaway of today's episode is that the goal of effective negotiations is for everyone to feel like they won. This podcast was inspired by a couple of things. One, I gave a talk to the Stanford Fellows about negotiating. Every year they request for negotiating tips because as physicians, we were not trained to negotiate and they are all looking for jobs. And so that was the original inspiration of this. And then I work with many people who consider themselves poor negotiators. We are servers and givers in medicine, and we're not trained not only to negotiate, but we're also trained not to win. We pretty much try to let other people win. And then the final reason and why this podcast has actually come to fruition is that my husband is trained in negotiation, and he is always telling me that I am not negotiating well. And he often tells me I'm not negotiating well when I don't even know I'm negotiating. And that occurred to me as something that we all really need to understand, that we are negotiating about many things all the time, even when we have no idea that we are. And so this podcast, whether you're negotiating for a job or to purchase a new car, helps you also understand how you are negotiating at home. And it will help you if you need to negotiate maternity leaves, speaking fees, divorces, custody, all the things. Life is a negotiation, as my husband would say. And so I am pleased to say that Mark's going to join me again today. He's back again for podcast number 3. I get a lot of rave reviews on his podcast because he brings a very different lawyer perspective, the male perspective. And I also think the highly researched perspective of women doctors, both from his time with all of us at Sagrada and from living with me for a long time. So thanks for joining us again.
You're very welcome. Yes. So as you know, but many people out there may not, I was an attorney for 19 years. I did all civil litigation. I participated in literally hundreds and hundreds of mediations. These are from emails to phone calls to formal mediations in front of a judge. But as you said, I do believe that almost everything in life is a negotiation on some level. So if I can help people negotiate better so that they end up feeling better about their outcomes, I'd be more than pleased to.
And one of the things you've brought up in my case is just that many of us are dissatisfied with the outcome no matter what it is. And so being able to feel like you won and actually that everybody can win is really the goal of negotiating. And I did not believe that was possible until you told me that, or that that was the goal of a negotiation. So I thought I'd start with just my thoughts on why negotiating is hard. And I will say for many women doctors, because some people feel like they are good negotiators, but most do not. And this brings me back to many of our default thought patterns that we often talk about here in this podcast. Most of us dislike conflict, and it's why we chose a giving, caring profession. We avoid conflict, and we consider a negotiation conflict. We also, when we are uncomfortable, we decide that something is wrong. We were trained to feel like discomfort portends a bad outcome. And so we get very urgent and want to end our discomfort as soon as possible. And as you'll learn from Mark, that's not a good strategy for negotiating. We're also connected to this idea of serving others and martyring ourselves. And specifically in medicine, many of us were taught that it's not about making money and it's not about having it turn out well for you. And so from that standpoint, we are not good negotiators. When I grew up in medicine, we were also told that we should be grateful to work in the profession or that we were lucky to get a job. And the culture was, again, that money for our services doesn't matter. And so, and even, our time not being valued. And so all of that plays into whether we, how much we value ourselves, how much we think the system should value us, how much we think other people should value us. And in fact, many of us were treated pretty poorly as trainees. That's the culture. And so we just assume that that's how we're supposed to be treated. And then we dislike uncertainty. Not only do we dislike discomfort, but we dislike uncertainty. So we want these negotiations over, or we just avoid them altogether. And then this one is my favorite, and I'm smiling because Mark's going to laugh at this one, but our sense of right and wrong. There's just a way that's right and a way that's wrong, and we don't want to compromise. We also like all or none. We have very much an all or none mindset in medicine, and that's how we were trained. Makes it hard to find compromise. And those two things keep us stuck. And then we very much fear walking away. We tend to catastrophize, and we have a scarcity mindset. That does not add to our negotiating prowess. And then the last thing is that most of us were taught that it's not okay to want what we want, and wanting what we want is selfish, and that we never really got to choose what we want or ask for what we want. In medical training, again, we're lucky to get a fellowship. We're lucky to get a residency. We should be happy to give them all the hours of our lives. It's a privilege. And so negotiating for something that you want feels super, super uncomfortable. So with that preamble of why we are not fabulous at negotiating, I want to hand it over to Mark to give us his negotiation tips, which I have found super helpful. I will say they are hard. They're hard to practice if you're someone like me, and I bet they'll be hard for many of you. I just have to keep practicing. And so if they seem hard, just allow them to percolate in your brain. And if you can even bring one of them to a negotiation, it's a game changer.
I agree. And, the better you know yourself and not only what you want, but what you'll accept, the better your outcomes will be. I've tried to help you and other doctors many times in negotiations, and all the things you listed come up as impediments all the time. But I'll go into some details about the sort of finer points of mediation. But if you walk away from viewing this with nothing but these next two words, you will be a better negotiator. The first tip is one to not only know what you want, but know what your bottom line is. You need to spend time before the negotiation starts understanding what is the least you will accept. That might not make you happiest, but the least you will accept. You need to know that before the negotiation. So many people run into trouble because they don't start to come up with their bottom line until they're already in the negotiation. And then you're already losing. So once you know your bottom line, the other important tip is to be willing to walk away. You said doctors don't like walking away. Nobody likes walking away. People like consensus. They like when other people like them. They don't want to walk away. They want to come up with some solution. And sometimes the solution's possible, but a lot of times the solution's not possible. And so when it's not possible, you need to be able to walk away. That doesn't mean the negotiation's over. It might start the next day, or it might start a month from now or a year from now, and suddenly you might get the other side closer to where you want to be. But you have to be willing to get up and walk away. So if you can do those two things, remember your bottom line and be willing to walk away, you will not lose any negotiation ever again in your whole life.
And I'm going to add in, even those two are really hard for me. And I know that you have helped two of my collaborators, both Gail and Ni Chang, with negotiations, and these tips were very hard for them. So if you think they're hard for you, perhaps decide they're just learning new skills. We can all learn amazing things as physicians. We continue to learn and learn. And so this is just another skill, learned skill, honestly.
Exactly. And it takes practice. And sometimes it's kind of scary, and you're worried that you're going to walk away and whatever you were hoping for will be forever lost. But you have to know at what cost is acceptable to you of the thing you're trying to achieve. So if you're negotiating for your salary, you have to know the minimum that you're willing to take. And if they're not willing to offer you that, you just need to walk away. You need to say, I'm sorry, it's not going to work out. We don't have a deal today. But if you want to practice more advanced negotiation techniques, I have a few. Part of learning what your bottom line is learning as much as you can about the person you're negotiating with. You need to know what they are interested in. Sometimes you don't know what they're interested in, but you shouldn't necessarily assume. You should do as much research as you can. If you're negotiating for a salary, you can research what comparable salaries are in your profession in the area. And if there's other things that come into play, the more you know about the other person's motivations, the more effective you will be. For example, you might be negotiating for a salary and you want to make X dollars a year. Well, you think that your employer might not want to pay you X dollars a year, but perhaps your employer doesn't care. Maybe your employer is willing to pay X plus 10 as long as you work another day per week or you do something else. So the more you can find out about what motivates the other side, the better off you will be. And as part of that process, you need to be thinking about where you can compromise. What can you offer the other side to make them happier while still being above your bottom line, still being in what you're trying to achieve. Anytime that you can offer something to the other side is a win for the overall negotiation. When you're negotiating, it's very important to not only know your bottom line, but to ask for what you want. I see a lot of physicians and other people, they don't ask for what they want. They won't even really tell you. They're just, I just like to have an outcome that makes everybody happy and we can all go home and sing Kumbaya. But that doesn't work very well. So you need to ask for what you want. It doesn't mean you should be aggressive. You rarely want to ask for what you want in a take it or leave it position, because that's not much of a negotiation usually. And you can ask for what you want, understanding that you have some compromise that you could give. You might want to make a salary of $1 million a year, but that you'll be willing to make $500,000 a year. So it's okay to start at $1 million, maybe even start a little above $1 million, and then you can work your way down while still staying above your bottom line. Oftentimes, at the end of a negotiation, even if you feel like you've won, or even if you feel like you've lost, it's important to remember where you started and at your bottom line. I see this all the time with Jessie. She'll be negotiating something, and she will have completely won the negotiation. She'll say, I want you to pay me X. And after some time, they say, yes, we'll pay you X. And invariably, then Jesse goes, darn, I should have asked for X plus Y. If they were going to give me X, that means I negotiated badly. But then you run into the trap that you're only willing to accept what the other side is unwilling to give. And then you will never have a successful negotiation. So if you have a goal in mind and you go into the negotiation and you achieve your goal, you should be happy. You should be pleased. You don't wake up in the middle of the night and second guess yourself and say, "Oh, I should have done this. I should have done that." It's negotiation. You don't know why the other side gave you that, and you don't really care. So remember to take your victory and be happy and move on to the next negotiation in life. Other than allowing yourself to be happy at the end, I think those are the main tips that I have, Jess.
The one other tip you mentioned, which I think is worth mentioning, is that these tips are helpful, but when the other person you're negotiating with is not rational, they sometimes don't apply. And I think that sometimes in healthcare, the people you're negotiating with or the system is not rational and it's not about your own value. We tend to over personalize in medicine, and we make things about our own value when they aren't about our own value. The other thing that comes to mind that you have mentioned to me is sometimes it's fine to do things for free if that's fun for you. I think we sometimes equate our negotiations, or we should negotiate, or we should do this because that means that we value ourselves. And it doesn't always, because sometimes doing things for free is fun and you don't need to step into the negotiation. And so I did want to throw that in there too, because I sometimes struggle with that. I do a lot of stuff for free because it's fun and because things can inherently have value to you or bring you joy or help you connect with your purpose and meaning, like teaching all that yoga. And I don't want to negotiate about anything at all. And so not negotiating isn't always the wrong thing to do. I think sometimes we get into the right or wrong of how to negotiate. And the last thing I wanted to say is that you're absolutely right that my default after any negotiation, and you even told me, when you were, people are asking you to talk and they want to know your fee. And I just want to point out that as a physician, we don't even see that as a negotiation. Until you told me that that was a negotiation, I wasn't seeing it that way. I was just struggling with figure out what I was worth and how does one figure that out, and not wanting to offend anyone and not wanting to undervalue myself. And it became this whole noisy storm. And so your tips about negotiation are really, really helpful. And then I'll say you can also have someone work with you who's really good at it. It's one of the reasons I love working with Mark. I now just delegate my negotiations, or I just ask him to help me figure it out, because for me, negotiating still involves a lot of discomfort, and I still don't trust myself, even though I'm practicing. And so that would be another thing that I would say is many times we don't want to ask for help. We don't want someone to help us negotiate. We don't want to get a lawyer to negotiate our contracts. And I would say, just like someone else, you wouldn't have a not brain surgeon do brain surgery, that oftentimes lawyers and people who are trained, lawyers are trained in the art of negotiating. You actually could get someone to help you and it might turn out better for you. And I think so often we don't want to invest in ourselves, that would be the other piece of advice I would throw in.
Yeah, I agree with that. There are situations where I would recommend people at least speak to an attorney, if not retain an attorney to help them. And these are situations that would dovetail with the legal system and where the consequences could be catastrophic to you. For example, in family law or custody proceedings, even negotiations with your employer, or negotiations with an investigative board of some kind. Those things where if you screw up, it would be catastrophic. Then, yeah, it's a good reason to seek out a lawyer, and lawyers love negotiation, so they'll be happy to help you. And I do want to touch upon what you said is the irrational actor. That's the hardest thing to deal with. Lawyers deal with them all the time, and it makes negotiating virtually impossible. The only way you can win with an irrational actor is if you know what they want and you're willing to give them that. But most of the time, you just got to ask for what you want and be willing to walk away when your negotiating partner doesn't behave rationally.
It really didn't occur to me, but I think that it happens very often in medicine. Sometimes even we negotiate with patients, I'll say. And just to understand who you're negotiating with is really important. You mentioned that. So I wanted to pivot a little bit into coaching tips for negotiating. And I think those listening will be more comfortable with these ones because they understand it and they've heard it before. I encourage you all to re-listen to Mark's tips a few times, maybe even write them down and just decide you're going to practice. And you can practice with low stakes negotiations, like what's for breakfast or where you want to go on vacation. It's really worth seeing them and practicing the tools. So when you need to use them, they are ready to go. So my coaching tips are to know your worth, or I will actually say own your worth. Most of us shy away from connecting to the fact that we have value and we're worth a lot. And we tend to not stand tall and to remember that we have years of training and skill in medicine, and we should not undervalue ourselves, whether it's giving a talk or a job. And I strongly advocate for fellows in particular who have never really been in a position to negotiate, to realize what value they bring, but to not overvalue or undervalue and not make it personal, but to really connect with the fact that you do have value and to be aware of the situation. And so I work with a fair number of doctors who are in maybe difficult situations, or because they're in not a right fit job, they're super behind on their charts, or they've had family things that get in the way, or so if you are someone who maybe has charts overdue or always late or low satisfaction scores, or your HEDIS scores are low, you can't be blind to those things when you're negotiating. You have to bring them to the table. It doesn't necessarily decrease your value. It decreases your value if you don't pay attention to them. And so as a former chief, I think you have to actually realize that what matters, you mentioned this, what matters to your boss. And so I think a lot of people get sort of frustrated and they think that that's a systemic challenge. And so to realize that when you are really wanting something, you have to be very realistic about who you are and what you bring, and also what your deficits are. We're not all good at everything, by the way. And so if that happens to be that one of those are your challenges, you need to know that and calculate it into your negotiating. Did you have a thought on that one?
Yeah, you don't want to be the irrational actor either.
Yeah.
So, if the salary in your industry is $500,000 a year and you go in asking for $3 million and your NPS scores are low and you never close your charts, you're the irrational actor.
Yeah,
So,
I like
know
that.
your worth for good and for bad.
Yeah, be realistic. And then trusting yourself and trusting what's important to you. I think we often look outside ourselves for what we should ask and what's right. And I think different things are important to each of us. And so it's actually advantageous to you to know what's important to you. A lot of people want to work part-time. That's more important. And then you can negotiate with that in mind, that we can give and take on different things, and that's a really valuable opportunity. And to realize, I think that lots of people have different agendas and different things that they want, and that can actually be a strength. But as you mentioned, you have to know what you want. And often in medicine, we haven't been asked that. So you have to sit down and I gave a workshop on pausing to prioritize last night, and you have to prioritize what you want, and you have to know what it is, connect to what's most important to you. And then the next one is telling stories that serve you. So not that I'm lucky to get the job, but they are lucky to get you. And that's coming in from a place of strength. And don't tell a story that you're a bad negotiator either, because that doesn't bring strength to your negotiating stance. Even if you might think so, go back and make a list of places you negotiated well or places your negotiations turned out well. And then knowing yourself and your habits, as we mentioned, stay out of those old habits of catastrophizing, scarcity, and right or wrong. And then Mark mentions the key one of being happy when you win. And I think we actually have to use our mindset to decide we're happy. You might default into, well, I'm not happy, or I didn't get what I wanted, or that's more of a compromise. But you can decide to think that you got the best deal. It turned out the best that it could. You did the best that you could, and allow yourself to be happy and content. And as many of you know from this podcast, being happy and content is really hard for us as physicians. We're trained to want more and to do more and to get more. And so realizing that that is something that you have to practice.
Yeah, and I would say also to, leave things on a good note, err on the side of being polite. Even if your negotiation doesn't work out, that doesn't mean that's the end of the story. That's not the end of the negotiation. You might not get the salary you want now, but maybe in 6 months you do. Or, given some time to think about it, the person you're negotiating with comes around to your position. So don't ever cut off your avenues to further negotiations. Be polite, try to end things on good terms, and don't be afraid to follow up again later.
And I think that's probably true in divorce and custody stuff too. I think sometimes people get super incensed, and rightly so. It's very emotional. But again, you never know as time passes and people's energies and emotions settle. And so just being very intentional, I think, is key. And that this gets into the next set of tips, which are the mindfulness tips. And I will offer, and I offer this also for difficult meetings, meditate before your negotiation, show up with a calm nervous system, breathe before, during, and after, because it actually shifts your physiology. It's going to allow you to be more creative. And mindfulness is noticing your tendencies. And mindfulness is showing up intentionally. And so intentionally means not reactively, pausing and responding and choosing an intention that you want to show up with. A lot of people want to show up confident. And I think that's pretty hard for most of us to do. So I like to choose a different kind of energy, like love or care or calm and grounded, or assured, choosing something that actually feels accessible to you and deciding what that actually feels like. You can bring that. It's a gateway into feeling confident ultimately. The other thing that I would say is, as you're being deliberate and intentional, I would encourage you to bring different energy than the fight energy, because I don't think that works particularly well. So connection energy or hope energy or believing in yourself energy, I think, is much more effective in a negotiation. Do you have thoughts about that?
I do. I think it's important to believe in yourself, and because you've given a lot of thought to what you want in your bottom line before you started your negotiation, that belief in yourself is very powerful. Sticking to your position is very powerful. You think you might not be a good negotiator, but the odds are the other person doesn't think they're a good negotiator either. And maybe they think that they're going to be able to get you to do X, Y, or Z. And so it's very powerful to stand firm in your belief. And that's why sometimes you got to be willing to walk away.
So the last three, I'm now thinking, are kind of funny, but they are mindfulness. So pause and don't fill the space with words. You mentioned this in your deposition podcast, that when there's pause or silence, we tend to jump in with words. And I think in negotiations, you can allow the pause. You can be patient, play the long game, and then being assured and trusting yourself, I think, are. You might wonder, well, why are these mindfulness? But mindfulness encourages trusting. It encourages patience. It encourages pausing and moving slow and being intentional.
Exactly. And just like if you're trying to get somebody to talk to you, being silent is very powerful. Sometimes in negotiation, the other side will want you to make another offer. They want you to bid against yourself without having to make any concessions or be in negotiations at all. You might be in a salary negotiation and you ask for a salary and the person says, well, that's unreasonable. I need you to give me another number. Well, you don't need to bid against yourself. So be willing to let it play out. Pause, let them, make them give you a counter, make it a negotiation.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So we always like to end with some reflection questions. And my thoughts today are, where are you negotiating that you don't know you're negotiating? Where have you done a good job negotiating, and what can you learn from that? And what if you showed up with your next negotiations feeling calm and grounded and with a toolbox of tools to help you negotiate effectively? How might that change the outcomes? So, thank you so much for listening. And if this podcast resonates, reach out, because coaching and mindfulness are game changers for negotiations for sure. Even if they're marriage negotiations or vacation negotiations, all of the things, not just salary negotiations. And a big part of moving through life more peacefully is to understand your mindset. And as you can see from what we shared today, that's key in this process. And then I also encourage you to join us, actually, both of us, for a retreat. Lots of people pick Mark's brain in the kitchen. And I will say that nothing in this podcast is legal advice, and nothing in the kitchen is legal advice. But a lot of this is human advice and things that we should have been taught probably in high school and college, but most of us, they don't offer negotiation there. And so I think many people enjoy their conversations. And if any of you are interested in having one or both of us talk to you a little bit about this more, I think it's a really beautiful topic that really all physicians need education on, and everyone in life really does. So reach out and we would love to do that. You will have to negotiate with Mark to set it up, though. And so we share this podcast and all these episodes as a passion project, and we would love it if you shared the podcast with people in your life, colleagues, teams, your fellows, your friends, and especially this one, because in my mind, this is something that most of us really truly wish that we had more training in. And it's kind of a game changer. It decreases a lot of worry and brings a lot more peace into people's life, which is what we're really hoping to do here. So with that, we hope you have a beautiful week. And if you wish, stay on for the mindful moment after the singing bowl.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We encourage you to dive into the show notes for each episode for more learnings and resources.
We also invite you to take a listen to the many other Mindful Healers podcast episodes. And please share the podcast far and wide with colleagues, friends, and family.
If our message and approach resonate with you, we would love to work with you.
When you listen to a podcast, you consume information, but when you work with us, you can actually practice and change.
We offer coaching and mindfulness experiences, talks, workshops, retreats, and more. Connect with us at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
The content of this podcast is not medical or life advice. We invite you to participate in the mindful moments we offer at the end of most of.
Welcome to today's mindful moment. Today's moment is a pause to connect with how you might like to show up in a challenging moment, whether that challenging moment is a negotiation or a meeting or something that feels uncomfortable. So finding a moment to find your sit bones or the soles of your feet, depending on where you are, connecting into what you might be sitting on or standing on. And if it's safe to do so, close your eyes, and bringing a hand to heart and a hand atop, hand on heart, and coming back to your breath, breathing in through your nose, now through your mouth. Taking a moment to set yourself up for calm and grounded before something stressful or uncomfortable. Setting yourself up to feel assured Breathing in through your nose, lots of assurance, calm, safe thoughts. Breathing out the tension, worry, idea that it might not be okay. Breathing in and breathing out. And I invite you to choose an intention as you look forward to this meeting or negotiation ahead. What if you were to choose to show up as a tree? Strong, tall, graceful, and elegant. Perhaps a little lumpy and bumpy and irregular. But an old oak tree is beautiful, wise. It doesn't react. It blows and sways in the breeze, but doesn't snap, except in the most turbulent of storms and hurricanes. Perhaps channeling that groundedness of a tree, channeling its beauty, channeling its strength, channeling its wisdom, channeling its stability. Noticing how that might help you as you went into a conversation that feels twangy or nervous. How could you channel a tree, the most beautiful tree out there? What would that feel like within? Breathing in and breathing out. Taking another moment or two to instill calm in each and every cell. Trusting yourself that you will do the best you can in the moment with the information, skills, and resources that you have. Allowing yourself to win or to succeed. Being willing to ask for help when needed. Being willing to be patient, calm, trusting, connected to what's important to you. Connected generously to this idea of both people winning. That is what generosity and mindfulness is about. Creating more happiness, more connection, and more ease for everyone. That is what an effective negotiation is about. Taking in 2 more long, deep, even breaths. Enjoying the calm and stillness. Letting it seep into every nook and cranny to carry forth with you. Noticing your strength. Noticing your calm. Noticing your ease and your stillness. When you feel complete, you can lower your hands and open your eyes. May you all have a beautiful week. Namaste.